At night, in the quiet valley of San Jose, a colossal mansion rises like the silhouette of a nightmare. Doors slam on their own, staircases climb into ceilings, hallways twist as if they're hiding something that was never meant to be found. People say that when you step inside this place, you aren't just walking through a house, you re-walking through a woman's fear. Sarah Winchester, heiress to a fortune built on weapons and death, believed the spirits of those who perished were following her, demanding that she build and keep building without pause. Tonight, you'll follow me into the darkest secret of all, why the house never stopped growing and whether the curse was real or just the echo of a grieving widow's mind. Prepare yourself, because from this moment on, every door you open might not bring you back. America at the turn of the 20th century was a land obsessed with progress, railroads slicing across the continent, cities glowing with electric light, fortunes being made faster than ever before. But beneath that glittering surface lived a quieter America, one steeped in superstition, grief, and the lingering shadows of the Civil War. And in that world, few stories captured the nation's imagination more than the tragic tale of Sarah Winchester. Sarah wasn't born into darkness. She entered American high society as a symbol of PR. Omi's an educated, musically gifted woman from New Haven, married to William Wirt Winchester, the only son of the family behind the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. Their rifles were celebrated as the guns that won the West, a phrase Americans still echo with pride today. But that pride carried a darker truth. Those same rifles were responsible for tens of thousands of deaths across the FR. To most people, the Winchester fortune was the pinnacle of American success. To Sarah, it would become a weight that pressed on her chest until she could barely breathe. Her life unraveled with devastating speed. First, her infant daughter, just 6 weeks old, died in her arms. Doctors called it marasmus, a mysterious wasting disease with no cure. Friends aid the light in Sarah's eyes dimmed forever that day. She tried to rebuild her life, pouring herself into her marriage, but fate wasn't finished with her. A few years later, her husband William succumbed to tuberculosis, the quiet killer that haunted American households. At only 43, Sarah was left completely alone. In a single stroke, she inherited more wealth than most Americans could. A gene, millions of dollars, a controlling share of the Winchester Empire, and a daily income that would make her one of the richest women in the country. But the America of that era had little sympathy for wealthy widows. Rumors began to spread, whispers at dinner tables, headlines hinting at madness. People wondered aloud if the deaths surrounding the Winchester family were a curse retribution for the blood spilled by their rifles. And Sarah, in her grief, in her unbearable loneliness, began to wonder too. She traveled across the country searching for answers. Ministers offered scripture, doctors offered medication, friends offered empty comfort. None of it touched the deep ache she carried. It was only when she met a spiritual medium at a time when seances and spirit circles were sweeping across the United States that her story took a turn that would shape American folklore forever. The medium warned her, the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles were restless, and they were coming for her. The only way to appease them was to move west, far from her past, and begin building a house that must never be finished. Most people would have dismissed such a prophecy, but Sarah, hollowed by grief and desperate for meaning, chose to listen. And that choice, rooted in the fragile human need to escape pain, became the first brick in a legend. The legend of a woman haunted not just by ghosts, but by a nation trying to make sense of its own violent history. As we move into the next chapter, you'll see how Sarah's journey west wasn't just an escape. It was the beginning of a mansion that would defy logic, challenge belief, and become one of America's most enduring mysteries. Sarah's decision to believe the medium wasn't simply an act of superstition, it was the consequence of a lifetime hollowed out by grief, and as America surged toward modernity, she drifted in the opposite direction, into a world shaped by silence, spirits, and the desperate hope that pain could be outrun. And so, her journey west began. Hence Sarah Winchester boarded the train heading toward California. America was changing faster than ever. The frontier was closing, railroads had connected coast to coast, and San Francisco had become a glittering symbol of the West's promise, a sprawling city alive with money, ambition, and reinvention. But Sarah wasn't chasing opportunity. She was running from ghosts. For most passengers, the journey west offered adventure. For Sarah, it was an exile. Wrapped in black widow's clothing, a symbol of Victorian mourning culture, she sat quietly at the window, the rhythmic clatter of the rails almost masking the tremor in her hands. In that era, grief wasn't something people talked about openly. It was something you wore like armor, and Sarah wore hers more tightly than anyone. When she arrived in California, she didn't choose San Francisco's thriving neighborhoods or the social circles she easily could have joined. Instead, she traveled south to the Santa Clara Valley, a place known for its orchards, foggy mornings, and the kind of quiet she believed might soothe her tortured spirit. She purchased an unfinished farmhouse on a vast stretch of land, small, unremarkable, nothing like the legend it would one day become. But Sarah didn't come alone. The medium's warning echoed in her mind. You must build a house and never stop building. If you stop, they will find you. In an age when spiritualism swept through American living rooms where seances, spirit boards, and ghost photographs blurred superstition with science, Sarah's belief didn't seem entirely out of place. Many widows sought comfort in the idea of speaking to the dead, but none took it as far as she did. Almost immediately, she hired carpenters, not for a renovation, not for repairs, but to begin a construction project with no blueprint, no final design, and no logical purpose. Workers hammered through the night, lanterns flickering in the darkness as the house stretched and twisted under Sarah's direction. It was said she paid workers double as they agreed to labor at all hours because the building could never stop. To her, the sound of hammers wasn't noise, it was protection. Yet Sarah wasn't a recluse. The people who saw her described her as soft-spoken, refined, and heartbreakingly polite. She was a contradiction, a woman grieving in total silence, yet constructing a home loud enough to drown out her past. Local townspeople watched with curiosity as carriage after carriage delivered lumber, glass, and ornate furnishings, all for a house whose purpose none of them understood. American culture at the time adored eccentricity, especially among the wealthy. Newspapers spun the story as one of a strange, haunted widow building, amazed to confuse spirits. Neighbors whispered that she could walk her halls 4 hours without reaching the same place twice. But those closest to her saw something else, an intelligent, grieving woman trying to reclaim control in a life where everything had been stolen from her. Still, there was a darkness she could not shake. Every night, she retreated into a small hidden room where she believed she could communicate with the dead. That secret space, known later as the seance room, became the heart of her nightly ritual. At midnight, she lit a single candle, opened her notebook, and waited for guidance. And whatever she believed she heard, she translated into construction instructions delivered to her workers at dawn. To some, these were the actions of a woman losing her sanity. To others, they were evidence of a woman burdened by a past. America itself rarely confronted the lives taken by the nation's most famous rifle. But no matter which version is true, one thing is certain: Sarah Winchester didn't just arrive in California seeking refuge, she arrived seeking redemption. And the house she built would become the monument to that search. As we enter the next chapter, we'll see how her grief and her instructions grew into something far larger than anyone imagined. A house that began expanding like a living organism, defying logic, structure, and even gravity. By the time Sarah Winchester settled into the quiet orchards of the Santa Clara Valley, her nights had already begun to follow a ritual rhythm. Midnight whispers in the séance room, morning, instructions delivered to carpenters, and the constant ringing of hammers echoing across the estate. But this was only the beginning. What started as a modest farmhouse was about to become one of the most confounding architectural mysteries in American history. California, in that era, was a place defined by reinvention. Gold miners, railroad tycoons, immigrants, and dreamers all arrived, believing the West held the power to rewrite their lives. Sarah, though wealthy beyond imagination, was no different. She wasn't rebuilding wealth. She was rebuilding her fate, and each wall she raised, each hallway she extended, felt to her like a step away from the darkness clawing at her heels. Construction began quietly, almost innocently. A new room here, a widened hallway there. But as the months turned into years, something strange happened. The house grew faster than anyone expected. Carpenters worked in shifts around the ceiling. Lanterns glowed through the windows at 2 a.m. as if the house itself refused to sleep. Lumber deliveries arrived weekly. Glass shipments came from the East Coast. Locals joked that the town's economy had 2 engines, fruit orchards, and Sarah Winchester. Yet the house did not grow logically. There was no architect. No master plan rolled across a desk. Instead, instructions were delivered one day at a time, sometimes sketches, scrawled hurriedly, sometimes verbal commands given with an urgency few understood. A staircase that rose only 9 inches before hitting the ceiling. A doorway opening into a sheer drop to stories high, windows looking into other rooms instead of outside. A hallway that narrowed so abruptly visitors had to turn sideways to pass through. 2 outsiders, it seemed absurd, but Sarah's world was not built on practicality, it was built on belief. And belief, in that era of American spiritualism, carried more weight than blueprints. Some said she designed staircases that twisted unpredictably to confuse the spirits following her. Others believed she built rooms upon rooms so the dead would lose their way before reaching her. The daily construction wasn't expansion, it was protection. A physical manifestation of fear wrapped in Victorian craftsmanship. But beneath all the mystery lay something profoundly human. Sarah Winchester wasn't just building to appease ghosts. She was building to survive grief, to distract her mind from the silence of a house with no child's laughter and no husband's voice. Americans have always had a way of building monuments to the things they can't let go of. Libraries after tragedies, memorials after wars, foundations built from loss. Sarah's monument simply took a different form. Endless rooms, endless corridors, endless motion, and the workers who built it, they became part of the story too. Many spoke of her kindness, fresh meals prepared daily, WAG's far above average, and the simple rule: if you need rest, rest. If you need time, take it. She created a small world of stability in a time when laborers often faced brutal conditions. Some carpenter stayed with her for decades, believing she wasn't mad, just heartbreakingly lonely. As the years passed, visitors who glimpsed the mansion described it as a living organism growing, twisting, and mutating under Sarah's direction. No one ever saw a final blueprint because there wasn't one. The house grew the way grief grows, unpredictably, uncontrollably, reshaping everything it touches. Still, even the most devoted workers couldn't ignore the feeling that the house was responding to something invisible. Why did Sarah suddenly abandon an entire wing mid-construction? Why did she order perfectly functional rooms sealed off overnight? Why did she insist certain hallways be rebuilt again and again, as if trying to erase a path she feared something might follow? Whatever she believed, the result was breathtaking. A 7-story maze, with trapdoors, secret passages, twisting staircases, and more than 160 rooms, each one a chapter of a story only Sarah truly understood. And America was beginning to take notice. Newspapers started calling it the house that keeps building itself. Travelers who came west for gold or railroads found themselves detouring through the Valley just to catch a glimpse of the strange mansion rising above the orchards. Some left confused, some left fascinated. A few left uneasy, but all agreed on one thing. This was no ordinary home. His was a sanctuary built out of fear and a fortress, built out of guilt. In the next chapter, we step deeper into the maze, where doors open into walls, and staircases lead nowhere at all. As Sarah's mansion grew more tangled and towering with every passing year, curiosity turned into fascination and fascination into myth. America had never seen anything like it, a house expanding, without logic, without pause, almost as if it were breathing. But it was when people began stepping inside that they realized something far stranger was happening behind those walls. Most houses are built to shelter. This house was built to confuse. Visitors who entered expecting a grand Victorian estate instead found themselves peering into a world where the rules of architecture and reality seemed to break apart. A narrow hallway suddenly split in two. A door opened to reveal a solid wall 3 inches behind it. A staircase climbed 7 steps up, then 11 steps down, only to arrive at the same floor it began on. Everywhere you turned, the mansion seemed to whisper, "Here, nothing is what it seems." The famous door to nowhere became the symbol of that madness, a perfectly crafted wooden door, framed with elegance, that opened directly into empty space, to stories above the ground. Another door, nearly identical, swung open into a brick wall. To an architect, these were mistakes. To Sarah, they were strategy. She believed the spirits could follow her through the house, but only if the paths were predictable. So she destroyed predictability itself. Dead ends, switchback staircases, windows inside walls, these became her weapons. Each twist and turn was her way of staying a step ahead of the unseen. But there was more to it than superstition. In the America of Sarah's time, grief had rules. Widows wore black for years, social gatherings excluded them, and emotional wounds were expected to heal quietly behind lace curtains and polite smiles. But Sarah refused to heal the way society expected. She built her grief into the walls. Each strange door, each unfinished room, each crooked hallway was a chapter of her mourning, physical proof of a mind trying to reorganize a world that had collapsed. The most haunting feature was the staircase to the ceiling, a beautifully crafted flight of steps rising gracefully, only to end abruptly against a solid plaster ceiling. No landing, no exit, nowhere to go, just a climb that led straight into nothingness. To some, it was madness. To others, it was metaphor, the painful climb through life after loss, only to hit a place where forward motion becomes impossible. Other staircases spiraled tightly, forcing visitors to twist unnaturally, as if mimicking the internal knots of anxiety Sarah lived with daily. One staircase used dozens of small, shallow steps built specifically so Sarah, suffering from arthritis, could ascend without bending her knees. Even in her fear, she engineered comfort for herself and for the workers who followed her up those twisting paths. Windows appeared in places no window should ever be. In the floor, beneath staircases, inside closets. Some looked into rooms you had already passed, giving the eerie sensation that the house was watching you. Others filtered light in ways that made shadows bend at strange angles. Everywhere, Sarah's touch was unmistakable Victorian craftsmanship wrapped around emotional instability. But despite the confusion, the house wasn't chaotic. It was intentional. That was what unsettled people the most. You could feel design in the madness, purpose buried beneath every oddity, as if Sarah was creating not a home, but a labyrinth meant to protect her from something she believed was always just one step behind. And yet, witnesses who met her described a woman surprisingly gentle, articulate, even warm. She wasn't the deranged recluse newspapers loved to sensationalize. She was a grieving woman navigating a culture T had had no place for her sorrow, so she built her own world where the rules were hers alone. Inside that world, the supernatural and the psychological blended so seamlessly that even today, historians argue over what she truly believed. Was she trying to outwit spirits? Or was she building a house where her grief could roam without boundaries? Either way, as the house expanded into a surreal maze of illusions and impossibilities, one truth became undeniable. The mansion wasn't trapping Sarah. Sarah was trapping her ghosts. But things would change in 1906 when nature itself struck a blow that shook the house and Sarah's fragile sense of control to its core. The deeper the house twisted into its own impossible geometry, the clearer it became that this was no ordinary construction project. It was a map of Sarah Winchester's inner world, but the rooms and staircases only told half the story. To understand the rest, you have to step into the one place she feared and depended on more than any other. If the mansion was Sarah's fortress, the seance room was its beating heart. Hidden behind a series of secret doors, the seance room wasn't grand or ornate. It was small, circular, and unsettlingly quiet, so quiet you could hear your own breath shift in the darkness. A single narrow door allowed you in, but exiting required finding one of 3 hidden doors disguised as wall panels. It was a room built for privacy and for escape. Every night at midnight, Sarah entered that room alone. No servants, no carpenters. No one knew exactly what she did inside. But the neighbors swore. The house took on a different personality at that hour. Lights flickered in distant windows. Soft footsteps echoed through the hallways. Sometimes the sound of a lone violin drifted into the orchard, air played by Sarah herself, as if serenading the dead. Victorian America was obsessed with spiritualism. Families gathered around candlelit tables, hoping to hear a knock from the other side. Newspapers printed spirit photographs showing ghosts standing beside living relatives. Even famous figures like Mary Lincoln sought mediums to speak to lost loved ones. But what for others was a curiosity, for Sarah became a lifeline. She believed the spirits guided her, that they dictated what she built, what she sealed, what she tore down. Workers often found fresh notes on their benches each morning. Close this passage, add a new staircase here. Seal this doorway immediately. To them, it felt like the house was playing a game with itself, creating and uncreating reality as if in dialogue with something invisible. But whether the spirits were real or imagined, something undeniably strange lived inside those walls. Carpenters reported hearing soft footsteps when no one was there. Doors slammed without wind. Cold pockets of air drifted through sealed corridors. One foreman claimed that while working alone, he heard someone whisper his name, though he stood in an empty hallway. Still, no event would shake Sarah and the mansion like the morning of April 18, 1906. At 5:12 a.m., the San Francisco earthquake ripped through the valley with violent force. The Winchester house convulsed as if struck by an invisible giant. The upper floors buckled and twisted, chimneys crumbled. Entire sections tore away from the main structure and collapsed into the gardens below. The famous 7-story tower, the tallest part of the mansion, disintegrated into rubble. Survivors later said the house felt alive, groaning and screaming as beams cracked and glass exploded. When the shaking finally stopped, the once magnificent facade looked wounded, almost as if the house had been punished by something beyond nature. Sarah survived, but something inside her changed. She interpreted the destruction not as a natural disaster, but as a sign. She believed the spirits were angry, that she had made a mistake. At some room, some hallway, Some decision had violated the fragile balance she had created, and so, in an act that stunned her workers, Sarah ordered the entire front half of the house, once the grandest section, to be sealed off forever. Doors bricked shut, hallways boarded up, rooms abandoned with furniture still inside, frozen exactly as they were the morning of the quake. For the rest of her life, Sarah never again used those rooms. The earthquake deepened her rituals. Seances grew longer, instructions became stranger. The house began turning inward, growing more labyrinthine, as if curling protectively around her. Even the workers who had once dismissed the ghost stories began to believe the house held something they couldn't quite explain. But beneath spirits, beneath the rituals, beneath the walls that bent to her will, lay a truth more haunting than any ghost. Sarah Winchester wasn't running from the dead. She was running from the weight of her own guilt, and from the silence that grief leaves behind. As we move into the next chapter, we leave the spirits behind and step into Sarah's mind itself to understand how a woe man with endless wealth and endless sorrow created a life defined by isolation, endurance, and the one thing she could never escape, herself. After the earthquake shattered the mansion and shook her faith, Sarah didn't slow down, she doubled down. The spirits, the signs, the gooey, it that clung to her like a second skin, all of it pressed inward, reshaping not just the house, but the woman at its center. To understand what she did next, we have to step away from the walls and step inside her mind. Despite her immense wealth, Sarah Winchester lived a life defined by silence. Not the peaceful kind found in quiet valleys, but the heavy, echoing silence of someone who had lost everything that anchored her daughter, her husband, her sense of safety. And now, after the quake, the fragile line she drew between herself and the spirits felt thinner than ever. Sarah retreated not from the house, but into it. She developed routines that were strange even by Victorian standards. Every evening, she moved through the mansion, carrying a small lantern, walking pat. She changed weekly. She believed patterns became predictable, and predictability was dangerous. Workers described her shadow drifting along upper corridors at odd hours, pausing at corners as if listening for something. Then, as midnight approached, she disappeared into the seance room, her sanctuary and her prison. Whatever happened in that chamber became her compass, guiding the next day's construction. At dawn, she emerged to hand workers instructions, meticulously written in her neat handwriting. Some notes were long, others were just a single line, but all were treated with the gravity of divine commandments. Despite the whispered stories of madness, Sarah was remarkably functional. She managed her finances, read newspapers, kept up with trends, and wrote letters with eloquent clarity. This was not a woman detached from reality, it was a woman balancing two realities, the world outside her windows, and the world inside a grief. American culture at the time believed that widows should fade quietly into the background, hosting tea gatherings and living dignified, subdued lives. Sarah did the opposite. She turned her mourning into motion. She constructed instead of retreating. She used her wealth not for luxury, but for labor, relentless labor. And yet, for all the chaos she created in the use, her personal habits were strikingly simple. She ate modest meals. She wore plain but elegant black dresses long after Victorian mourning customs ended. She gave generously to local charities, supporting hospitals and orphanages without ever seeking attention. Workers remembered her as gentle, polite, even funny at times. One carpenter recalled her bringing warm bread to them as they worked late nights during winter. Another described how she insisted laborers rest whenever they wished, a rarity in an America where working men were often treated as expendable. But kindness and loneliness often coexist, and Sarah embodied both. She had no close friends, no romantic partners after William, no children. Her massive mansion, filled with 160 rooms, had only one bedroom. She only occupied, surrounded by empty spaces that swallowed her footsteps as she walked. People often imagine her wandering the halls like a ghost. But the truth is more tragic. She wasn't a ghost in her house. She was trapped by it, trapped by the belief that if she ever stopped building, the spirits would find her. Trapped by the weight of every life lost to the rifles that bore her family's name. Trapped by grief so old it had become part of her identity. And yet, in her own quiet way, she found purpose in the construction. Each nail hammered was a heartbeat. Each rue 1,000 added was a breath. Each blueprint abandoned was a moment of surrender to fears she couldn't outrun. Still, no amount of building could stop what was coming. Sarah was aging, her health was failing, and the mansion, the only companion she truly had, was about to outlive her. As we enter the next chapter, the hammers will fall silent for the first time in 38 years. And the moment that happened, the truth of Sarah's life and the secrets she sealed in her walls would finally begin to surface. Life inside the Winchester house followed a rhythm that belonged to no one but Sarah Winchester. While America marched confidently into the modern age, jazz clubs rising in New Orleans, Model T Fords beginning to roll off assembly lines, and cities glowing brighter with electric lights, Sarah's world ticked to a quieter St. Ranger beat. It was the rhythm of hammers tapping at dawn, of footsteps echoing through unfinished corridors, of a house that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. She began each morning in ritual. Before the sun cracked the horizon over the Santa Clara Valley, Sarah stood on her wraparound porch, wrapped in a black shawl. Fog clung low over the orchards, curling around the mansion's towers, like ghostly fingers. Below her, carpenters gathered, waiting for the small stack of handwritten notes she carried. She descended the steps slowly, every movement deliberate, as if choosing each step kept her anchored to the world. Her notes were meticulous, her handwriting elegant, almost delicate, but the instructions inside ranged from confusing to downright mystifying. Extend the hallway 4 feet to the east. Add a window overlooking the staircase landing. Seal the door at the second turning. Reverse the direction of yesterday's staircase. Some instructions contradicted those given just days earlier. Workers had long stopped trying to find logic in them. This wasn't architecture, it was ritual. Yet they obeyed without hesitation, partly because she paid generously, partly because she treated them with an unexpected gentleness. While factories back east were known for grueling shifts and dangerous conditions, Sarah created a different kind of workplace. She insisted workers take breaks whenever they wished. She prepared hot lunches from her own kitchen during cold months. She asked after their families, remembered their children's names, and listened to their worries with a softness most wealthy Americans never showed. In a world stratified by class, Sarah closed the distance with compassion. But kindness is not the same as connection. Her life, for all its activity, was profoundly solitary. After handing out instructions, she retreated inside, disappearing down hallways the workers rarely used. The mansion was enormous, yet she lived in quiet pockets of its small bedrooms, narrow sitting rooms, and hidden passages. She walked alone. Her footsteps echoed through empty rooms like droplets falling into a deep well. Throughout the day, she drifted through the house, carrying a small lantern, studying walls, touching banisters as if feeling for vibrations only she could sense. At times she paused in intersections of hallways, tilting her head, listening. Workers who glimpsed her in those moments said she looked like someone waiting for an answer or a warning. Afternoons were often spent at her writing desk or at the organ in the ballroom. Visitors described hearing low, mournful chords drifting through the house, melodies that sounded like they were searching for something, or mourning something that had already slipped too far away. And always, she avoided staying still for too long. Stillness felt dangerous. Predictability felt like an invitation. Movement was survival. As evening fell, lanterns were lit in every corridor, casting long wavering shadows that stretched across floors and climbed walls like restless silhouettes. Workers headed home. The valley grew quiet again, but Sarah remained awake. She walked routes that changed weekly, intentionally altering her patterns so that nothing could follow the same path twice as one work. I put it. Then, at midnight, she slipped into the séance room. The door closed behind her. Silence folded around the house, and whatever she believed she heard in that small circular chamber guided the next day's construction. This was the rhythm of her life, not one of wealth or luxury, but one built on movement, fear, memory, and the fragile hope that building might keep the past from catching up. To understand why Sarah Winchester lived the way she did, you have to understand the weight of her last name. A weight heavy enough to bend a life out of shape. In the American Imaginer tie-in of the late 1800s, the Winchester name was almost mythic. The Winchester rifle wasn't just a gun. It was a symbol of frontier triumph, of manifest destiny, of a young nation expanding westward with unstoppable force. Cowboys carried it, soldiers carried it, lawmen carried it, outlaws carried it. It shaped newspapers, folklore, dime novels, its legend woven into the country's identity. But every legend has a shadow. For Sarah, the Winchester name didn't represent glory. It represented grief. It represented the crack of every rifle that took a life. And she believed, whether through trauma, superstition, or guilt, that those lives were tied to her fate. That the sorrow she carried wasn't random tragedy, but consequence. America had no language for that kind of pain. No psychologists, no trauma therapy, no understanding that grief can twist the mind without destroying it. Widows, especially wealthy ones, were expected to retreat quietly, wear black, host tea gatherings, and maintain composure that society labeled dignified. But Sarah never fit into those neat cultural boxes. She didn't find solace in social circles or religious communities. She didn't remarry, didn't travel the world, didn't return to East Coast society where she could have lived a comfortable, celebrated life. Instead, she built a world that existed entirely on her own terms. Inside the tea world, she waged a private, silent war. Some nights, she wandered her gardens, running her fingers over rose petals, as if grounding herself in something real, something not tied to death or memory. Other nights, she sat at her massive pipe organ, gently pressing keys that released long, trembling notes into the empty ballroom. Workers often paused to listen, unsure whether the music comforted them or sent chills up their spine. Her instructions became stranger the older she grew. A room completed in the morning might be sealed by nightfall. A sunny sitting room boarded over before she ever stood inside it. A hallway repainted 3 times in a week, simply because the spirit energy felt wrong. These choices weren't madness, they were symptoms of someone trying desperately to regain control in a life where control had been taken from her again and again. Yet despite the spiraling rituals, she remained astonishingly sharp. She handled finances precisely, managed payroll without error, donated quietly to local hospitals, funded orphanages, and kept the estate running with smooth efficiency. If she was losing her mind, it certainly wasn't in the practical aspects of life. Her madness, if it was madness at all, lived only in the places grief had carved deepest. But time doesn't negotiate, even with the wealthy. As Sarah aged, her hands began to tremble. Her steps slowed. She climbed her shallow, custom-built stairs more carefully. And still, construction never stopped. Carpenters joked that the house would be finished when the Pacific Ocean dries up. They admired her, even pitied her. None of them truly understood her. Maybe no one ever could. Because the truth was this: Sarah Winchester wasn't trying to escape ghosts. She was trying to escape the version of herself that loss had created. and the house was the only place she felt she could keep rebuilding that lost version, room by room, day by day. But age was catching up. Her body was fading, and for the first time in decades, the house, her last sanctuary, was growing faster than she could outrun her fears. Soon, the hammers would fall silent, and the moment they did, the world would finally look inside and see what she left behind. For nearly 4 decades, the house had grown like a living creature, guided by Sarah's grief, shaped by her rituals, fueled by a fear she could never quite outrun. But time, relentless and indifferent, was closing in, and when it finally caught her, everything changed in an instant. On the night of September 4th, 1922, the Winchester house stood unusually still. Workers later said the air felt heavier than usual, as if the mansion itself sensed something shifting. Lanterns flickered softly behind stained glass windows. The wind rustled through the orchard, and deep inside the house, in the bedroom she chose after abandoning dozens of others, Sarah Winchester lay quietly beneath a hand-stitched quilt. She was 80 years old, tired, worn from years of silent battles. No one fully understood. Around midnight, the hour she once reserved for her seances, her breathing slowed. Whether she felt peace, fear, or simply release, no one knows. What we do know is that the woman who built endlessly, who walked every hallway with a lantern and every night with whispered prayers, closed her eyes and did not open them again. When morning came and word traveled that Mrs. Winchester has passed, the mansion reacted in a way almost no one expected. The hammers stopped immediately, completely, as if so. Mion had struck the entire estate silent with a single command. Workers froze mid-task. Some stood with nails half-driven. Others stepped back from half-built walls, unable to reconcile that the rhythm of their days, the rhythm of nearly 4 decades, had ended just like that. One carpenter, who'd worked for her since he was a teenager, later said, "It felt like the house exhaled for the first time in years." Within hours, Sarah's relatives arrived. From the East Coast, they wandered the mansion in stunned silence, stepping into rooms none of them had known existed. Doors opened into voids, staircases spiraled into dead ends, secret hallways wound behind walls like veins. They found wine bottles filled with scrap notes, sketches of rooms that were never finished, and maps of renovations. The tea made no architectural sense. And then came the most haunting discovery of all: the sealed rooms. Behind nailed shut doors, they found entire chambers frozen in time, exactly as they'd been, left after the 1906 earthquake. Dust-covered furniture, cracked plaster, a piano with broken strings, even a seance table still set with chairs, as if waiting for guests who would never return. In one sealed parlor, they discovered a Tiffany window Sarah had ordered, but never installed, an intricate web of spider motifs and sunshine patterns designed to refract light into rainbow shards. It was worth a fortune, yet she kept it hidden, unseen for decades. Why? No one knows. Maybe she feared its beauty would attract spirits. Maybe it was meant for a room she never built. Maybe it was just another piece of her inner world she couldn't bear to reveal. Sarah left behind thousands of notes, but no explanation. No memoir, no confession, no final message to answer the cue. Houston, America had asked for years, why did she build this way? Her will divided her fortune generously to hospitals, orphanages, and charities. But the house, her life's most mysterious work, was left tangled, unfinished, and impossible to understand. Realizing the mansion's worth was more cultural than practical, the new owners opened the house to the public, and just months later, visitors flooded in immediately, drawn by the same mix of curiosity and unease that had followed Sarah during her life. They walked the hallways she once wandered at midnight. They climbed the staircases that led nowhere. They stood in the seance room where she whispered to the dead. Many left feeling what workers had always sensed. that the house wasn't haunted by spirits, it was haunted by her, because every strange corridor felt like an echo of her thoughts. Every sealed room felt like a buried memory. Every twisting staircase felt like her attempt to climb away from something painful. On the door, why the hammers stopped. The mansion didn't become quieter, it became louder because, without construction to distract from it, the grief embedded in its walls finally spoke. And as we move into the next chapter, the final chapter, we ask, what truly remains inside a house built from fear, guilt, genius, superstition, and solitude? A curse, a legend, or the most human story of all, the story of a woman who tried to build herself a way out of sorrow. The morning after Sarah Winchester took her final breath, the Santa Clara Valley felt unusually still. The orchards, usually alive, the rustle of leaves and the distant call of farmhands rested in a strange quiet. Even the birds seemed to hesitate, circling above the sprawling mansion as if waiting for something to break tea. Silence. Inside the house, the air was thick, almost unmoving. Workers who arrived before sunrise sensed immediately that something was wrong. The lanterns Sarah warmly left burning through the night were dark. The windows that often glowed with faint, ghostly light were blank. No notes sat neatly stacked on the carpenter's benches. No footsteps echoed through upper hallways. Then the message spread. Mrs. Winchester is gone. No one shouted it. No one needed to. It moved like a whisper through the house, carried from worker to worker, each man stopping as the words reached him. Some sank slowly onto unfinished staircases, others removed their hats in silent respect. A few simply stood still, looking up at the mansion with an expression somewhere between sorrow and disbelief. For 38 years, this house had never paused, not for storms, not for earthquakes, not for holidays. It grew at every hour of every day. The sound of hammers was so constant that locals said you could navigate the valley by following the faint rhythmic tapping in the distance. When those sounds stopped, the silence was deafening. One carpenter, a man who had practically grown up on the estate, described it later. The house felt wrong without the noise. Like it wasn't meant to be quiet. Like it didn't know what to do. Without Sarah's instructions, workers wandered the corridors with no direction. They passed half-built rooms framed like skeletons. They walked hallways that ended abruptly in walls. They stood before doors that opened onto nothing but empty air. These oddities, once routine under Sarah's guidance, suddenly seemed alien, disturbing even. Some men refused to go upstairs alone. Others avoided the seance room entirely. A few left early, claiming they felt watched by the house itself. By noon, all work ceased. Tools were laid down gently, as if the men were afraid to disturb something fragile. For the first time in decades, the Winchester house entered a state it had never known: total stillness. That stillness allowed the house's secrets to rise. Workers and relatives began exploring rooms that Sarah had sealed off years before. They pushed open nailed doors, crossed into spaces untouched since the earthquake, and found personal items left exactly where they had fallen. In one room, a velvet chair lay overturned beside a cracked mirror. In another, a music box still held a wind-up melody that played faintly when opened. A trunk filled with children's toys, perhaps intended for the daughter she lost, sat untouched beneath a dusty sheet. Then there was the most unsettling discovery. A narrow hallway Sarah had wallpapered, then boarded over, then wallpapered again, covering the boards. No one could understand why. It was as if she was trying to bury something, not physically, but emotionally, layer upon layer. Throughout the day, the workers spoke of the same eerie feeling, not sadness, not fear, but a strange sense that the house was adjusting, shifting into a new chapter it had never been meant to reach, because without Sarah, the mansion had no direction, no purpose. Its reason for existing. Its ceaseless construction was gone. Some believed the spirits she feared had finally caught up with her. Others believed she had amply grown tired, and a few whispered that maybe she had finally found peace. As night fell, the house stood unlit for the first time in decades. Its windows, once alive with lamp glow, now reflected only the moon. The mansion looked less like a labyrinth and more like a monument, silent, massive, and undeniably haunted by its creator's absence. And this silence, this heavy, almost sacred quiet, was only the beginning of what the world would discover after her death. In the days after Sarah Winchester's death, the mansion became something it had never been during her life. Time, fully exposed. For nearly 4 decades, only Sarah truly understood the tangled blueprint of her home. Workers built the rooms, but only she knew why some were sealed, why certain staircases turned abruptly, why hallways doubled back on themselves like a maze trying to hide its own center. Now, with no instructions to stop them, relatives and appraisers began opening every door, every boarded entrance, every hidden passage. What they found turned the mansion from an eccentric architectural curiosity into a living archive of Sarah's private world. Behind one sealed partition, they discovered an entire ballroom that had never been used. Dust blanketed the parquet floors like frost. Two grand chandeliers hung perfectly still, crystal teardrops catching faint shards of light. A pipe organ stood silent in the corner, its keys yellowed with time. It looked less like a room abandoned and more like a room waiting for a party that would never come. In a locked cabinet inside that ballroom, they found a stack of letters tied with ribbon, not financial documents, not legal papers, but sympathy notes from across the country after the death of her infant daughter. She had kept them for more than 40 years. Unopened, perhaps she couldn't bear to read them. Or perhaps she couldn't bear to throw them away. Another discovery unsettled even the bravest workers, a hidden attic room filled with items damaged during the 1906 earthquake. Mirrors shattered, a rocking chair broken across the legs. A servant's bell twisted from the wall. Sarah had ordered everything gathered here and locked away, almost as if she believed the object still carried the trauma of the quake. Then came the room that changed everything. Deep within the mansion's oldest wing, behind 2 layers of sealed doors, workers found a narrow chamber containing a small wooden desk, a candle stub, several journals, and a stack of half-burned papers in an iron bucket. The journals were blank, but the burned pages revealed faint fragments. They whisper, "The paths must change. Tonight the East Wing feels unsafe. Forgive me, they weren't plans. They weren't instructions, they were confessions." Word of the discovery spread fast. By the 1920s, America was fascinated by spiritualism, seances, hauntings, and the idea of talking to the dead. The press seized the story of Sarah Winchester, a wealthy widow, haunted by spirits, building a house without end, and turned it into front-page mythology. Headlines bloomed across the country. The cursed mansion of the Winchester widow. 38 years of construction. For the dead, what was she hiding? Tourists arrived in waves. Locals who once whispered gently about Sarah now spoke of her with awe, suspicion, even fear. They said the house changed shape after dark. They said Sarah still walked the halls. They said the spirits she was running from had never left. But the truth buried in the rooms she sealed and the note she burned was far more human than supernatural. The house wasn't just built for ghosts. It was built for grief. It was built for guilt. It was built for a woman who lost too much, too fast, and too deeply. And now, with the walls open and the secrets out, the world could finally see the mansion for what it truly was, a map of a broken heart constructed room by room, year by year, until the day its architect could build no more. As we head into the final chapter, the question remains, what do we make of a house like T? His, a curse, a miracle of eccentricity, or the most intimate portrait of sorrow America has ever seen. With Sarah gone and the mansion finally silent, the world expected the house to fade into obscurity, a strange relic, a curiosity, a footnote in California history. But the opposite happened. In death, Sarah Winchester became larger than she had ever been in life. And the house, freed from her secrecy, began writing a story that even she could never have imagined. When the first tour opened, just months after her passing, people lined up around the property. They came by horse-drawn carriages, by motorcars, even by foot from nearby towns, all driven by the same irresistible curiosity. What kind of mind builds something like this? Inside, guides led visitors through twisting hallways, up staircases that stopped at ceilings, past doors that opened into walls. Guests gasped, laughed nervously, whispered to one another. Some dismissed it as eccentricity. Others were unsettled by the eerie emptiness, and a few those who lingered in the seance room or crossed the narrow bridge above the dry well felt something colder, older, something that clung to the air like a memory refusing to dissolve. Newspapers amplify. The spectacle. The Winchester Mystery House opens. To the curious, what was she hiding? A labyrinth for the dead. But with every headline, the truth grew blue. Raya. Americans didn't just want the story of an unusual widow, they wanted a ghost story. They wanted drama. They wanted a curse they could trace through hallways and photograph in shadows. Soon, myths sprouted faster than the house itself had grown. Some claimed Sarah communed with Native American spirits seeking vengeance. Others insisted she was building a spiritual prison to trap restless souls. A few newspapers even reported falsely that Sarah had admitted to engineers that the house spoke to her. Tour guides, eager to captivate guests, added their own embellishments. The bell rung at midnight to summon spirits, the secret seance passages only she knew, the explanation that she slept in a different bedroom each night to confuse the dead. Some of these stories contained kernels of truth. Man, why did not? But truth mattered less than the myth. And America, especially early Hollywood, fell in love with that myth. By the late 1920s, film crews began visiting the house, scouting it for horror pictures and murder mysteries. Cartoonists parodied it in magazines. Ghost hunters begged to spend the night. Writers claimed they felt pressure on their shoulders or cold fingers brushing past them as they explored narrow hallways. Yet, amidst all the attention, the mansion remained heartbreakingly unchanged. Its rooms still smelled faintly of varnish and dust. Its windows still filtered light in strange, fractured patterns. Its staircases still climbed nowhere. One detail fascinated psychologists and architects alike. The house made no sense by accident, but perfect sense by emotion. Architects studying the mansion noted that the design mirrored patterns seen in trauma patient sloops, dead ends, safe spaces, sudden closures, and pathways that retreat inward instead of advancing outward. To them, the mansion was not a haunted house. It was a visual diary of a woman mapping her internal wounds onto physical walls. But for the public, the simplest explanation always won. Sarah Winchester was cursed. She ran from ghosts. She built to survive the dead. And the more the story spread, the more the mansion's identity fractured into two versions: the real house Sarah built and the legendary house America wanted. Yet the truth is that both versions coexisted. One made of grief, one made of myth. As visitors streamed through, something extraordinary happened. The house, once built as a fortress against spirits, became alive with people, laughter, stories, flashes of curiosity. The halls that once held fear now held fascination. Corridors that once carried Sarah's lonely footsteps now echoed with hundreds of new ones, and strangely, the house thrived. It embraced its new purpose. It absorbed the noise, the the myths piled onto it. It became what Sarah never intended: but perhaps always needed. A place where her story would not be forgotten. But the more people explored, the more they sensed something else, that the house still had secrets, that there were still rooms not yet found, still meanings not yet understood, still foundations hiding the deeper truth of Sarah's life. Becca. Use for all the fascination, one question remained, unanswered. What, exactly, was Sarah Winchester afraid of? That question, unresolved, haunting, and deeply human, would guide the next wave of researchers, filmmakers, historians, and skeptics who came through its doors. A century has passed since Sarah Winchester walked these halls, yet the house still breathes with her silence. Historians, engineers, psychologists, all have tried to decode its secrets. They mapped its corridors, studied its foundations, traced every strange turn of its staircases. And the more they learned, the clearer one truth became. The house was never about ghosts. It was about a woman trying to live with pain the world could not see. Visitors today arrive seeking mystery's doors to nowhere, windows into empty rooms, the seance chamber where midnight whispers once shaped the walls, but they leave with something different, a quiet recognition of their own sorrows, their own unfinished rooms, the parts of themselves they've sealed away, because the Winchester Mystery House is not just a monument to superstition, it's a monument to humanity, to grief that rearranges your world, to guilt that reshapes your path, to love that lingers long after loss, to the way we all build, sometimes with wood and nails, sometimes with memories and fear, to keep ourselves standing. In the end, Sarah Winchester did not leave behind a curse. She left behind a mirror that asks each of us, what are the rooms we keep building? And what are the ghosts we're still trying to outrun? And so, long after the last hammer fell silent, the Winchester House stands, not as a warning, not as a curse, but as a reminder that every life carries unseen rooms, every heart hides hallways no one else will ever walk, and every one of us, in our own way, builds structures to survive the things that break us. Sarah Winchester's mansion is extraordinary, the truth behind it is something deeply ordinary, a human being trying to make sense of grief, guilt, and love that never let go. If our home teaches us anything, it's this: we are all architects of our own fears and our own healing. Thank you for walking these halls with me. Until the next story, keep listening, because sometimes the past still whispers,